is Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich from WCNC in Charlotte. And Brad, before I let you get to your forecast and your impacts, we had a question on YouTube that I thought you might be able to help us with, because I know there's at least one answer in the Charlotte area, so I'm teeing you up for this one.
Okay.
Holly from the Charleston area wants to know if she were to voluntarily evacuate from the Charleston area, where could she potentially go further inland, knowing that places south or places to her north along the 995 corridor may not be an option?
Ooh, that's a good one. It just depends on if you want rainy weather or sunny weather. I would say come to Charlotte, because I think we'll be okay, but it's not going to be the greatest Friday or Saturday. The other option would probably be to go west. I would say go into Georgia, maybe head over towards Atlanta or Augusta might be a good place to go. But yeah, I do think if I were going to evacuate Charleston, just get inland. You know, we have a saying I used to use all the time from my days in New Orleans was, you know, you run from the water, you hide from the wind. If you can get away from the water, even if the weather's not great, that's where you want to be. And then you can just hunker down from the wind inside a good sturdy structure. So just getting far enough away from the coast that the storm surge isn't an issue is probably all you need to do. And sometimes that could just be going to the north side of Charleston and not really worrying about heading all the way to the upstate or somewhere else.
The other thing I was thinking, and I don't know if Holly has a camper, so this may or may not be an option, but we know the Charlotte Motor Speedway has opened its campgrounds to folks who are looking to evacuate. So I know that was at least one option. So thank you for that answer.
And Atlanta Motor Speedway too. So two.
So you've got two options. You can go west or north from Charleston. Brad, it's good to see you. Unfortunately, we're talking about a now hurricane, expected to be a tropical storm by the time it comes landfall. What are the impacts we can expect to see in the Charlotte area? And I want to preface for folks that, as Brad will tell you, the Charlotte television viewing area ranges all the way from Boone and Blowing Rock in the mountains, all the way through Charlotte, down into portions of the Piedmont and the Sandhills. So Brad's answer is going to be fairly wide-ranging here.
Yeah, we cover just about we could see just about everything. I mean, parts of our viewing area, especially South Carolina, the Sandhills, I'm getting a little more concerned about the wind threat, to be honest with you. You know, if you were to ask me 24, 36 hours ago, I said rain is our biggest issue. But as I just heard you guys discuss, the kind of faster movement of this system and maybe the dry slot getting us on Saturday might really cut down on our totals. And that faster movement actually means that probably the stronger winds could come in much farther inland. So I do think the areas south and east of 85, wind could be a big issue, coupled with the rain. And then in the mountains and foothills, that's always the one tough spot, because it doesn't take a ton of water or rain there to cause flash flooding and landslides, just because of the topography. It only takes a couple hours of a good band to set up there and to cause some serious issues. So from the mountains, it's really going to be a flash flood landslide kind of threat. And then as you go down to the Piedmont, it becomes more of a wind and rain threat as we go into Friday and early Saturday. Though I do think late Saturday, things are going to improve rather dramatically. That dry slot looks like it's really going to take hold and maybe get us back to more just isolated showers or drizzle for late Saturday into Sunday.
I want to bring Frank into this conversation as well. Frank Strait, who's watching this from Columbia, watching this from much of South Carolina. Frank, anything you want to piggyback off of what Brad just said with your notion of watching that I-77 corridor through South Carolina?
I agree with Brad on the wind. I think that's going to be a bigger problem inland than we thought earlier. The Weather Service in Columbia and actually a lot of South Carolina now has issued inland tropical storm warnings. I don't think that's the case in the upstate yet, not last I checked, but most of the rest of the state was under an inland tropical storm warning because of the concern for wind. Wouldn't surprise me if we saw gusts in the 50 to 60 mile an hour range around here. In Columbia, for example, and perhaps some of those 50 mile an hour gusts even get up into the Catawba River area, York, Chester, and Lancaster counties. That might extend back into the central Savannah River area too. So I am concerned about the wind, and the faster movement is part of it. And so yeah, I'm definitely concerned about that, and I think it could be a real problem. That in addition to the rain, which is going to be substantial here in South Carolina too.
Yes, you mentioned the river, the Catawba amongst them. All of the water from the mountains, from the Charlotte area, are going to then flow down into South Carolina, and we'll be dealing with that runoff. I'm going to come back around to that notion in a moment. Brad was mentioning the heavy rain and the winds. Brad, we've got some big events in Charlotte this weekend. Charlotte FC and Panthers come to mind. We've already had the Heart Walk and Taste of Charlotte reschedule. What type of impacts can we expect to see if people are trying to plan their weekends?
Well, Scotty and I will tell you a lot of these outdoor events, these temporary structures are the ones that get you. The stages, the tents, you don't need severe winds to have damage to those type of structures. So a lot of the stages for like these concerts and these tents they set up for like Taste of Charlotte and other outdoor events, most of them only rated to about 30 miles an hour or less. So you get a 30-mile-an-hour gust or higher, you've got some real issues, and they will start shutting things down because of those winds. And then you couple the wind and rain threat. The winds by themselves are pretty strong, probably not going to bring down a ton of trees, but you get some rain to saturate the soil. We haven't had our leaves come off the trees yet, so there's still a lot of surface area for those trees to grab that wind load, and you're going to get some trees to come down. I do think the river flooding probably will be the least of our issues because it's been so dry. I'm just looking at some of the lake levels. There's some capacity. Duke does a really fine job ahead of these systems of clearing water out of the system to make room. They do that for a couple of reasons. One, they want to get more water in there, but they like to generate some power as well, which is great for them. So I think we're going to be okay there. It's really going to come down to flash flooding and that wind and rain combined to cause maybe some power outages. But yeah, for outdoor events, lightning's not an issue. So like Charlotte FC, Panthers game, David Tepper put in that beautiful field turf for a reason. It's going to hold up just fine in the rain. Those events will go on as scheduled. It takes a lot to move a professional sporting event unless you're in Tampa, like where they moved the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game to Minnesota. It's hard to do that. The bigger reason I was on Sports Radio today talking about this, some of these games across the Carolinas, the weather might not be the biggest issue. It might be resources being drawn away from those events to go help in other parts of the state or even down in Florida. So I've seen that before where like first responders need to be down in the flood prone areas of Florida or other locations near the coast. And so they can't use them for security purposes at games. And so if you draw resources away from the games, they could be canceled. Sometimes you get a lot of indirect impacts from the weather that you don't think about. And that happens quite a bit. The cancellations of schools in South Carolina for 30-mile-an-hour winds. The buses there's a rule in South Carolina, the buses cannot be on the road if the winds are above 30 miles per hour. It's something about the rating on them. They put out a memo in 2016 about this. So right away today, when I saw some of the schools going virtual and people are like, well, what do you mean they're going virtual? Well, the buses can't be on the road above 30 miles an hour. So it's a really weird rule, but it's one of those things that, if you're around here locally, it happens quite a bit.
That is a very interesting rule. Frank, I believe you have a question and a comment you want to bring on in here in the forecast.
Yeah, I was curious what you think, Brad, about the tornado risk. I was thinking it probably doesn't get as far west as Charlotte, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was a little farther west than what the SPC outlook is showing. I'm just curious what you're thinking about that.
Yeah, initially I didn't think they would be anywhere near us. I thought it would be east of 95, but the faster movement, might pull in that warm air. The coastal front might make it a little bit closer. I keep looking at some of the STP values, and there's a couple spots where the kind of the wedge boundary almost gets pushed back to the west a little bit. There's definitely a ton of shear. The problem is it's surface-based instability. If we get any breaks, that dry slot might actually on Saturday might make things a little more interesting. We get some sunshine out. You might get a little spin up here and there, especially with a decaying tropical system. But I think it's our lowest threat right now. But that's one of those things that'll catch you off guard because the day of, you could see the sun pop out or the warm air get tugged back to the west far enough, and all of a sudden you're looking at a tropical spin up because it's like QLCS tornadoes. Those tornadoes, it takes such little to spin those up. These cloud bases, you're going to see they're going to be hugging the ground. So if you get rotation in the mid levels, it's pretty much at the surface already. It doesn't take much to spin it up.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking too, was looking at the surface-based instability. I thought, well, there's obviously going to be plenty of shear. So the question is, are we going to get the surface-based instability? And it wouldn't take much, like you said, with the cloud bases almost at the ground, and all the shear in place. It's a high shear low cape situation, really.
Yeah, that's like North Carolina severe weather in a nutshell. High shear, low cape. It seems
Right.
like every event is like that for us.
Brad, in a moment we're going to hear from Chris Mulcahy of WCNC, who today had his Weather IQ, the educational series, about the dirty side of a hurricane. What are some of the things that people can do tonight, tomorrow, ahead of these impacts to prepare their home and their neighborhood?
That's a great question. I think the first thing I would do is start taking down the flags in your yard or out in your front porch. Get all the furniture. If you got a hammock or a swing, if you have one of those, kids got the trampolines, you got to anchor all that stuff. That stuff's going to become airborne, because what happens is, the damage isn't often done by the wind. It's what the wind picks up and throws at your house or your car that ends up causing the damage. So you get something picked up, and all of a sudden a lawn chair gets thrown into your sliding glass door and it breaks the sliding glass door. So those type of things, secure those tonight and make sure everything is not going to be flying debris into your property or someone else's property. The other thing, thank goodness we don't have a lot of leaves off the trees right now. That's bad for the wind, but it's good for the rain. I would normally say clean out your storm drains so they're not clogged up, because you may not live in a floodplain, but I guarantee you have a storm drain near your house, and all it takes is for one of those to get clogged up and you could have a huge flood issue on your property. So clean out those downspouts, make sure they're all clear, make sure water can get away from your foundation, and just be ready for some wind and rain that's going to blow stuff around. So if you got parts of your house that might not be covered but can get wet because of wind blown rain, you got to make sure that those are all sealed up as well. So make sure you don't get water into your house. Those are the main things I would do probably tonight and tomorrow before the rain gets in here, because the wind will come first and then the rain will follow.
Brad, I have one question. I have one question, not directly to the Carolinas, but I know you've been talking about it on social media. It's very early in Hurricane Ian, but it looks like storm surge was a major problem in Southwest Florida. Can you kind of go into, I know you did it on social media, but for those who are watching and listening tonight, why was the storm surge so bad down in Southwest Florida with this event?
Well, two things. One is the angle of approach. That part of Florida, if you get a southwest to northeast moving storm, it's like the perfect setup to drive water into all those bays, especially around Naples and the Fort Myers area. And then you had a rapidly intensifying hurricane at landfall, which is just like the worst combination. What was interesting was the storm was loosely organized farther out, but I think what people often forget is a weak storm from a wind standpoint isn't necessarily going to deter storm surge, because if you have a broad circulation, it can drive a lot of water towards the coast. And if it continues to intensify, that water just builds and builds and builds. And then on top of all this, we had heavy rain ahead of the system. You remember that if you look at the satellite radar loop, there's this big jet of clouds and rain that extended to the northeast along the old front. Well, that rain fell over Florida even the day before and yesterday and today, and that water falls over the main parts of Florida, and that water wants to flow back out into the Gulf of Mexico downriver. Well, the problem is it's running into this surge of water from the wind coming upriver, and the water has nowhere to go. It just starts spilling over all these canals, bayous, and goes everywhere. Some of the I'm glad you asked this question, because some of the surge I'm seeing down there is some of the worst urban surge I've seen in a long time. It reminds me a lot of Katrina, but that was a levee breach. This is straight up surge coming into highly populated areas. And I think a lot of folks were caught off guard. They just didn't realize the water could ever get that high. And my concern for that area is that's and you probably all know friends or family, that's a big retirement area in Southwest Florida. There's a lot of older people living down there that just aren't able to deal with some of this weather. So I really get concerned when I see that amount of water in a populated area with a very at-risk population. So I think as the day goes on tomorrow, we're going to hear a lot of stories, and we're going to get pictures and videos that are probably going to blow people's minds, because the cell service is down, power is down, and a lot of this information just isn't getting out tonight. But just looking at what I've seen so far, it looks pretty bad down there.
I will second the cell phone service being down. I teased a few moments ago we were going to have a phone call from Dan Whitaker. None of his calls are going through right now. We were going to try to do a plain old phone call, and we can't even get that to go on through. He's still trying. We'll see if we can get him in some point this hour.
Text message is the best thing to do in this stage because, the text message, for anyone who doesn't understand how your cell phone works, the ping that your phone does to find a tower is basically the amount of information a text message contains. So if you can ping a tower, you don't necessarily have to have a full signal. You can send a text message. During Katrina, that was one of the things I remember. You could not receive or make a phone call, but you could always send text messages because you could still ping those towers. And even though the towers might be down or the power's out, they've got about a 36 to 48 hour battery backup. And even laying flat on the ground, we were able to use cell phone towers until those batteries went out.
Let me ask you this, Brad, because I know the answer will be watch TV as long as you can or stream on your phone as long as you can. But if you're in a situation where you don't have power or you have very limited internet, how can you still get reliable weather information?
First of all, don't get on social media. I know it's hard. You're looking for information. It's just eating up your battery on your phone. Put it in low power mode. But one of the things, and I tweeted this today, and I was surprised at my people to know, at least in every iPhone, and I know pretty much every Android device, there is a barometer in your phone. And you're probably saying, why is there a barometer in your phone? Well, the barometer in your phone helps you figure out the location of your phone in comparison to sea level. That's a really important feature for locating your phone for GPS and for compass and for navigation. But it's a great tool in weather. You can download apps that will let you access not the weather from a local station or the internet, from the actual barometer inside your phone. You don't need cell service to do this. You can access the barometer in your phone. And one thing you can learn, even if you have no information, you can't access the outside world, but you got your phone and some battery life. If the barometer's going up, the storm is moving away from you. If the barometer's going down, it's moving towards you. So it does give you some limited information that you can actually use when you don't have any cell service. And it's a really great feature on most people's phones that they don't even know they have access to. You just got to find an app. And I use a free app. It's just called Barometer. I know it's really great marketing, but it just lets you see the barometer from your phone. And it's a really cool thing you can do in a pinch when you don't have cell service and you have limited power.
In a moment, we're going to get to that explainer from Chris Mulcahy. But let me ask you this, Brad, as I was just kind of looking at the satellite picture, looking at where Ian is at this hour. Artemis, you think they made the right call?
Oh, man. I can't believe they weren't debating not making that call.
Right?
The NASA guy kind of bad-mouthing forecasters like that. Oh, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, this is the thing we haven't talked about, and I'm sure you guys will. This was a extremely well forecasted storm. I went back today and looked at advisory number 1. If you get a chance, look at the first advisory for TD9, and the 5-day point on the map where it had landfall as a major hurricane was literally where it made landfall today on advisory number 24. So it is stunning. I think we get caught up the information age. We kind of him and Hall about these subtle little shifts along the track, but the long range forecast and all along the way was spot on. Even the rapid intensification was forecasted when this was south of Cuba. They were forecasting rapid intensification, and it came to be. So really well forecasted storm. And the fact that the NASA waited so long for that very expensive rocket to move, by the way, was probably something they should have done a while ago. I think they did. I think it was like a firework that they wanted to set off so bad that they didn't want to pull it back into the garage. But this was a good call by NASA.
Jared has found that.
Look at that.
Yeah, I was actually looking at some of these today, just for comparison's sake, and I had the page up, and yeah, I mean that's. I mean.
Yeah, the goal is to keep it in the cone. They literally had the point on the map, which is amazing. And that's really for the people watching. The goal in this, and people will say, oh, it's shifting left or right. Remember, it's the cone. Anywhere in or on the edge of the cone, if it's still in there with the next track, that's really not a big change. That's actually what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to keep it in the cone. The way I always look at this is like, I love playing golf, and you want to keep it in the fairway. And so the goal is not to try to get a hole-in-one on a par 5, but keep the forecast in the fairway in the long range. And they didn't even do that. they almost got a hole-in-one on a par 5. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
I'm gonna put here's the first one. That's Tropical Depression 9. Here's today's latest, right? So it's like right there.
It's crazy. Yeah, that's the one
and then
thing.
There's what came in between.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, right?
Yeah, I think about, the 1900 hurricane in Galveston. I always talk to people about this, like how good forecasting is. In 1900, I know that's a long time ago, but there were literally folks on the beach having a good time with a Category 4 hurricane offshore and had no idea it was there. And now in 2022, we're forecasting the exact point on the map that a major hurricane is, a week ahead of time. It's like unbelievable, the skill that we have as forecasters now. And it's taken for granted way too much.
And you know what's crazy is that this is not the first time they have done something like this either.
Yeah.
I want to say that they had Florence pegged within like 2 kilometers.
Yeah.
I mean, incredible.
And think about it. In the future, we're going to go from a 5-day cone to a 7-day cone. And people will go, why do we go 7 days in the future? Because the 5-day cone is so much better than the 3-day cone. Guess what's going to happen in a couple of years? Our 7-day cone is going to be as good as the 5. So this is just the progress that we're making. And it is really stunning. And the thing that it makes hurricane forecasting so amazing to me is you're dealing with a lot less data points. Without the hurricane hunters and with a storm over an ocean, you don't have constant Doppler radar and upper air data and surface data because it's over open ocean. So the fact that we're able to forecast these so well over open ocean is pretty amazing to me.
We will let folks know who are watching live with us on this Wednesday night. We're going to take some of your questions. So if you've been putting the questions into the comment box on Facebook or YouTube during the course of the hour or have been waiting to, now is the time. Go ahead and do that. We're going to get to some of your questions in just a moment. Brad, before we forget, how can people watch you and get your updates in the Charlotte area this week?
Okay, so any social media on everything, including TikTok, WX Brad, Weather Brad is where you can find me. Our YouTube channel is great, Weather IQ. I'm doing a vlog twice a day in the morning and in the evening on the setup and kind of the forecast discussion. And obviously, if you're in the Charlotte area, you can watch me on air on WCNC. But remember, you can download our app or watch me online as well. You don't have to live in our viewing area anymore to watch. You can watch anywhere. So between social media, apps, the website, and our streaming services, there really is any way that you feel comfortable watching or getting information, we have the ability to give it to you. And I post a ton of content online. So if you go to my Twitter feed or my Facebook page, you'll find plenty of it there. But I've been doing a lot of TikToks with this storm, and they've been very successful because I think that there's an audience out there that they get a lot of their information on TikTok, and it's been pretty amazing to see some of the interactions I've had on there for people in Florida that don't have information, and I'm able to post there and get some stuff across. So we're trying everything. The goal in these events is, why do we post on all these different platforms? Because you're trying to get the information to as many people as possible in these big severe weather, high impact events like this.
Absolutely. Appreciate that, Brad. You're welcome to stick around. We'll answer some of those live comments here in a moment. You mentioned Weather IQ. Chris Mulcahy had his Weather IQ today on that dirty side of the storm.
Yes.
Hurricanes can devastate coastal areas with epic winds, dangerous storm surge, and even spawn multiple tornadoes. But one side of the storm is worse than any other. It's called the dirty part of the storm. Let's raise that Weather IQ. Hurricanes rotate like this, counterclockwise, and when that rotation of the storm matches with the direction that it's moving, it enhances the winds. For example, a hurricane producing 100-mile-per-hour winds moving north at 20 miles per hour would have a max wind speed of 120 miles per hour on the right side since you add those numbers together. But on the left side, the winds are fighting against its forward push. So the forward speed is subtracted, making the total winds 80 miles per hour. That's a big difference. All sides of a hurricane or tropical storm are dangerous, but the strongest side of a hurricane is the right side based on the direction it's moving, aka the dirty side. We call this the dirty side because this is where the worst weather occurs. This is also the part of the hurricane that has the worst storm surge along the coast, among other things. Using Hurricane Ian as an example, the worst storm surge would occur here, where the counterclockwise winds are pushing water onshore. The faster the storm is blowing and moving, the higher the storm surge. The dirty side also has the most moisture, leading to the heaviest rainfall rates, and has the most wind shear, which makes tornadoes and waterspouts more likely, especially in that right front quadrant. With WCNC Charlotte, I'm meteorologist Chris Mulcahy.
Thanks to WCNC Charlotte and Chris Mulcahy for letting us share that story with you. As Brad mentioned, you can find more stories like that on the WCNC Charlotte Weather IQ YouTube channel.